Welcome back to the Sunday Scripture Podcast. We got Carl, we got Brad, we got Paul, we got Barnabas. We got a very excited, amped up crowd, and we also have a very grumpy crowd. We're talking about Acts chapter 14, and I'll show you we are moving into a new section. I've pointed this out each time that the color coding, when you look at the complete Bible document, which there's a link in the show notes, indicates the section of the book that we're in. So we're going into Acts 13 to 20, the mission to Israel and clashing with Roman culture. Points to consider, Brad and Carl. Grace is at the center of the message. One message produces two different responses, and the gospel can disrupt established loyalties. So if you could only say one thing to a brand new community, when public speakers say the first 5 minutes, what you say is really going to capture them, they lead with grace. That message of grace gets two entirely different responses from the crowd. And there are structures in place in the cities that they visit, just like every structure you're ever a part of in the workplace, in the home, in the church. And those structures are destabilized, and that generates a lot of stress. So I'm going to see which one of those is most interesting to you, or if you would add a bullet. Paul and Barnabas entered the Jewish synagogue and spoke as they had before. As a result, a huge number of Jews and Greeks believed. However, the Jews who rejected the faith stirred up the Gentiles, poisoning their minds against the brothers. Nevertheless, Paul and Barnabas stayed there for quite some time, confidently speaking about the Lord. And the Lord confirmed the word about his grace by the signs and wonders he enabled them to perform. The people of the city were divided, some siding with Jews, others with the Lord's messengers. Then some Gentiles and Jews, including their leaders, hatched a plot to mistreat and stone Paul and Barnabas. When they learned of it, these two messengers fled the Lycaonian cities of Lystra and Derbe and the surrounding area, where they continued to proclaim the good news. Carl, which one of these 3 points do you think sticks with you the most in what we read?
I think grace is the center of the message, sticks out to me the most. I'm also curious, we've got a lot of different groups of the city, different religions or ethnic backgrounds. When you think about it, when you think about the diversity, we're surprised that it was just two.
Yeah, there had to be some that were neutral, some siding with the Jews, others with the Lord's messengers, and then a bunch of people like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you see in the posts that you see from faith communities, those faith community leaders leading with grace? Carl?
I'm going to give a little bit of grace and say grace more.
Okay.
But I understand your point.
Yeah.
Lots of folks do not lead with grace. They lead with negativity and finger pointing and
fear.
Perfect. Fear. That's right.
Yeah.
Fear in order to do what?
Oh, no. I mean, here's what you need to be afraid of in order to be a part of our group. This is what's coming. And if you want to be safe, or you want to make sure you're saved from this coming threat, you need to be a part of us. You need to follow us. I think that's where some religious leaders fall. I see more grace, but I also, when I ask that question, when you talk about like, what do you see on your feed? It's all based on the algorithm too, right? So, like, some of that can go back to is like, what you get out is what you put in. And so if you're constantly searching out that negativity, that's what you're going to see. But if you're surrounding yourself or only tracking and following people who are positive, then I think you will see grace more often.
To piggyback on what Brad's saying, Joe, I think I see more followers not leading with grace than I do leaders. It's the followers who get it wrong in my feed.
And what do you think gets them sideways? Is it a sense of scarcity? There's only so many people that will be approved, so I need to make sure I set myself apart. Is it normal changes, generational changes in society that are interpreted as the crumbling of the church that they need to rally against, or other?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complex. I don't think that there's ever one. I think you probably, again, you summarized some really good parts of it. I still go back to fear, man. Like, people are just afraid, and politicians make a living on telling you what you need to be afraid of and who's to blame for it. I mean,
Mhm.
that's a line from like the American President from 25 years ago, right? Or 30 years ago, that movie. And it's true. Like, this is just where people unfortunately fall today. And followers are fearful, even if they are being led in the right way. I mean, they still can fall into that trap of giving over into those fears.
And I think that culturally, we are influenced to the point of showing any kind of grace and humility is a sign of weakness, and that's not what we're all about.
Yeah, I
I
would
think
agree.
that's a good word.
I'll go back to your previous slide because I like the point of it. The gospel can disrupt established loyalties.
Yeah.
I think the gospel is always doing that. I think the gospel is doing that to me. I think that the gospel does that to every person. I mean, this is a constant struggle. So this idea that you're always going to, you're going to figure it out and you're going to be good. Nah, that's not true. Like, it's a constant struggle in disrupting our loyalties and what we claim allegiance to.
It's what's makes people very angry as well. Like, you can offer the woman at the well forgiveness, and we think that's odd. You can go up into the cemetery and heal that man that has several demons. He freaks us out. But when you get people to switch what they're doing, it was a tax collector, he was a fisherman, whatever that may be, and get them to do a new thing, I think that is very destabilizing and upsets people a lot.
Mhm.
Jesus is only, his own family was disrupted when they asked him, are you sure you know what you're doing? When the leaders came from Jerusalem to see John the Baptist, and he's drawing massive crowds. Would those crowds not have gone into Jerusalem, Brad, or were they going to Jerusalem and now coming out to him? It's probably a balance of that.
Yeah. I mean, he was attracting people from Jerusalem,
Mhm.
so much so that the Pharisees followed him out there and they're like, hey, what are you guys looking at? And
So it sounds like all three of those have a tug on all three of us and could influence us in the story. So let's look at the next one. What I want you to see is leaders have limited security status and influence. If you talk about fear, they're asked to go in this community. They're not escorted in 4 Suburbans that are hiding which one that person's in. There's no people going along with guns or swords or anything. They're just going into these communities. When someone experiences healing, restoration, forgiveness, the people surrounding them must decide how to interpret what's happened. What on earth was this? This person is healed. And how are they going to treat them going forward? Because that's how I've known them for a year, 5 years, 10 years, their entire life. The crowd witnesses the power of God, but explains it using the perspective they had before the event. I think this is one of the really important things that we experience in ourselves, in others, in the church. You can only conceive of the things that you've seen. In anything that's happening now or in the future has to go through that lens, and that lens gets shattered like those previous commitments. In Lystra, there was a certain man who lacked strength in his legs. He had been crippled since birth and had never walked. Sitting there, he heard Paul speaking. Paul stared at him and saw that he believed he could be healed. Raising his voice, Paul said, "Stand up straight on your feet." He jumped up and began to walk. Seeing what Paul had done, the crowd shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have taken human form and come down to visit us." They referred to Barnabas as Zeus and Paul as Hermes, since Paul was the main speaker. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was located just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gate. Along with the crowds, he wanted to offer sacrifices to them. When the Lord's messengers, Barnabas and Paul, found out about this, they tore their clothes in protest and rushed out into the crowd. They shouted, "People, what are you doing? We're humans too, just like you. We're proclaiming the good news to you, turning to the living God and away from such worthless things. He made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. In the past, he permitted every nation to go its own way. Nevertheless, he hasn't left himself without a witness. He's blessed you by giving you rain from above, as well as seasonal harvests, and satisfying you with food and happiness." Even with these words, they barely kept the crowds from sacrificing to them. Jews from Antioch and Iconium arrived and won the crowds over. They stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing he was dead. When the disciples surrounded him, he got up and entered the city again. The following day, he left with Barnabas for Derbe. Carl, which one of those things captured your eyes? You heard that.
Well, I'm going to take the easy one, and that is Barnabas getting back up after being stoned and dragged out of the city. It's
Or
pretty
Paul.
darn impressive. Paul, yeah.
Yes. The crowd's reaction, we're either going to worship you as a god or throw a rock at you. Is that a great sense of capturing the normal sense of a crowd, Carl? We're about to start football season. We're about to have 70,000 people in the stands. They got a lot of expectations, hopes, dreams. They exalt a leader, and then they do what to that leader if it doesn't work out?
They stone him and drag him out of into the parking lot.
Brad, what'd you see?
Well, so there's a little bit of background with this place, Laconia. So there was actually a legend that went like this, that the people around Lystra, they would tell this story that once Zeus and Hermes came down in the past in disguise, and no one in all the world or all the land that they knew would give them hospitality until these two old peasants, and I believe the names were Philemon and Bacchius, took them in. And as a result, the whole population except those two were wiped out by the gods. And the two supposedly were made like these guardians of this temple, and they were turned into these great trees when they died. And so outside this temple, there was these two massive trees. And so they had this legend that these were the two people who had entertained the gods or who had treated them kindly, and everybody else died. So when Paul heals this man, the people in Lystra were like, we cannot make that same mistake again. We have to treat them like gods that they are. And so it was almost like them trying to protect themselves when they celebrated them as much as they did. It was a response to this deep-seated belief that this is what we are supposed to do with these men. They didn't understand who they were. Now notice, and this is what I love about this story, I love about this like section in Acts, Paul appeals to their humanist kind of nature, their naturalist nature. He does not go directly into preaching what he normally would. Look at what he says: turn to the living God and away from what he made heaven, earth, the sea, and everything in them. Go to the next slide. In the past, he permitted every nation to go on its own way. Nevertheless, you haven't left him well. He's blessed you by giving rain and seasonal harvest, satisfying you with food and happiness. He's appealing to what the people already know. He's not like pouring into them this new deep theology. He's taking the theology that exists, their understanding of what God does and doesn't do, and he's saying, oh no, the God of Israel does this as well. The God who raised Jesus does this as well. You just haven't known about him, but now you do. I love this idea of evangelism. Like, I love the way in which Paul does this at the place. And yeah, it's going to have consequences. It's not the people, though. Remember, it's not these people that stone him. It's the people from down the road that were already mad at him. Because the very next thing is like, all of a sudden they're back and they're like, hey, let's go. We're going to take you outside and beat you.
So I think of two things. When I first read this, I wondered if it was a little bit of a shot at having gods for every element of nature, saying this God is the one God, but you don't think so.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a shot saying like all your other gods are pointless. I think he's just simply saying, no, the God that we're preaching to you is even greater.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is the old thing of like, you got to give them something more beautiful to follow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, you don't tell them they're wrong and that they're following the wrong gods and gods. That's not getting anybody anywhere. And maybe there's a time and a place for that, but like, they've got a more beautiful story. And it just so happens that a part of their old story fits in with this new story. And he just sort of points that out to them.
Yeah, and that's poorly worded by me as I look at that. There's nothing in there that says you've been worshiping a god of the blade of grass and a god of the livestock.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't judge what they did, but
Yeah.
I think he does frame it in comparison.
Yeah.
Maybe compare, but not contrast. The other thing I wondered is, go ahead, Carl.
I'm sorry, Brad, you gave us some background on the legend of the two trees outside the temple being people who were the only people who were spared. If the people are reacting to providing sacrifices for our messengers, then they're behaving out of fear, just like what we talked about before.
Sure. Yeah.
They're behaving not out of worship, but out of fear to learn from the past.
Listen, that's absolutely correct. I mean, like, again, we're not lauding what they did or celebrating what they did. You're exactly right. Like, this is that natural response that they have, is like, we're afraid that what happened to us in the past is going to happen to us again. Yeah,
that's fantastic. That's like almost abusive. They've been trained to react that way.
Mm-hmm.
Mercy. All right, so that's still in the show as of right now. Carl, that thought and comparison. One of the last things I wondered, we'll go to the list during the stories that are in Holy Week. There are times, actually prior to Holy Week, sorry. There are times when the authorities want to punish Jesus and harm him, but they don't do anything for fear of the crowds.
Mm-hmm.
These crowds think they're gods and did these incredible things, yet the Jews from Antioch and Iconium have no concern coming in and stoning these guys in front of the crowds that are awed by them. Is that odd to you?
Well, it says they won the crowds over. You know, they I don't know how do you do that? You know, and maybe Paul was convincing enough when he and Barnabas were basically saying, listen, we're not gods, we're human, we're just like you and I, you know, we're just like you guys are, you know, we're no different. Maybe they bought into that, but these people kind of show up and from a surrounding area, and yeah, they get their way.
Paul and Barnabas don't follow the playbook of frightening faith community leaders that want to exalt themselves and number one, and install fear number two. They say, I'm not exalted above you, and this is not to be feared. And by doing that, to your point, they're then at risk for somebody to come in and flip them. Somebody who leverages fear. Mercy.
So another little small snippet there. Is it interesting that they drug him outside the city? They didn't do it within the city. The reason they didn't do it within the city is because this was a Roman outpost. they're taking it into their own hands, the punishment or the judgment or the justice that they're supposedly putting out there. In some ways, they're usurping the power that Rome had in this particular place. So they have to drag him outside the city. The men in Jerusalem wouldn't do that, right? The religious authorities, the religious people who were corrupt and wanted Jesus dead, they didn't do it themselves. They let the Romans do it. They followed the strict order. So it's a little fascinating that this is that anger, that frustration, that hatred has boiled over so much that these men are not, they're like, they don't even care that they're in a Roman outpost or a Roman city. Like, they're going to take this guy outside and stone him to death for what they think is to death.
So like a Western, like Unforgiven, when Hackman's like, there's going to be no violence in this city, in this town. I don't care what you're saying. That's the way the Romans would be. There's not going to be any violence unless we're bringing it.
That's exactly right. The Romans were very strict about that. Like, they were the law and nobody else could do anything. And so they take him outside so that the Roman authorities maybe, quote unquote, don't have authority out there. I don't know.
These Jews who did this, are they well aware of Jesus's story? And are they taking matters into their own hands? So, for lack of a better term, it doesn't come back to haunt them. The Romans didn't do it right, or whatever the argument might be.
Yeah. I mean, you could make that case. I mean, they do know something about Jesus, because these are the men who have listened to Paul preach Jesus. And we've seen in other places when Paul goes into a synagogue in order to preach, like, he hammers the people, like, you put Jesus to death, like, you and your folks are the ones who did this. And so he's very critical of, and he was one of them. He knows firsthand because he did it himself. So he's really critical of that. So that's why these people would have been so upset, because he had been at their place preaching these things and saying these things.
Yeah, I've missed a few weeks, so y'all have already covered this. These Jews are as ticked off about him just being a traitor more than anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so the chapter started there in Iconium. So we've gone away from Antioch, and so we were in Antioch. This was the first journey that he does. So it goes from Antioch, which is to Iconium, which is about 80 miles. And then Lystra is probably a little less than 20 miles away. So, I mean, like, we're traveling, we're moving a pretty good distance. The ones in Iconium, right? That's who comes in order to be able to beat him. The Jews came there from Antioch and Iconium and won the crowds over. They've traveled over 80 miles to get to this dude. That's wanting to that's wanting to get some vengeance, right?
And how far Jerusalem is from where John the Baptist was, is that comparable? I mean, the geography is not comparable because the geography is straight up, but
yeah, John the Baptist was a lot closer. Yeah, to Jerusalem. Yeah.
So which one of these three would capture you from this section if you were picking one, Carl?
I guess the crowd witnesses the power of God, but they explain it using their perspective, their previous perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Limited purview. How about you, Brad?
Yeah, I think to me, that is the meat of what that little section is about. I mean, I feel like we read that of, like, the stoning and getting up, and that's awesome. And, but I think that what's more important is just what happens in that city. And even to even think about the fact that, like, the reason why they thought he was is because they healed somebody who couldn't walk. Like, that's lost on us. The fact that, like, they healed somebody who couldn't walk. And what jumped out at me before that text, if you'll put that text back up, look at specifically verse 9 of that text that we read, because this is the question I have is, like, what did Paul see?
Mm-hmm.
He heard Paul speaking. Paul stared at him and saw that he believed he could be healed. That's a cool line right there.
Yeah.
That like he's looking at the guy, never says anything. The guy doesn't ask for anything. The guy's simply listening, and Paul witnesses something within this man in order to be healed, and then proceeds to heal him. And that's how the chaos starts. I mean, that's how all of a sudden now they're being celebrated as gods and God, that they're being celebrated as Zeus and Hermes, that, they're now getting chased out because of this new crowd that's coming in. All of this is happening because of this one moment, which I just think is a pretty cool moment.
Mm-hmm.
He saw in his face that he had faith.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What does that look like? I mean, and I mean, I asked that question like rhetorically because I feel like I've probably seen it. I mean, I'll speak from my experience. I've probably seen it before. I've looked at somebody and gone, nah, they got faith. There's some assurance there. I don't love the word, but there's some assurance that they have.
After a lifetime of who knows how many people have promised to do it or walked past him, giving him no hope.
Crippled since birth.
No, it's good. The faith community leader, I understand the background that you gave. Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of fear there, but that faith community leader, more gracious than most faith community leaders.
Yeah.
But I do have to give credit. When you go into Acts, you read again and again and again, the synagogue invited him to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting to me. And I know there's a kind of community component as well as a theological component to the synagogue. But for Paul to continue to be invited despite all the stress and pain and all that, I think it's interesting. If I think I would pick the first bullet because I'm still compelled by what Carl said about flipping that fear. And that's the most interesting to me. It's going so far.
Okay. Can we do one more thing?
Yeah.
So go back to the idea of the temple leader not interpreting these men as a threat, but instead interpreting them as through his perspective and his lens of who they are. That's fascinating to me too, right? Like it's just an interesting thing to think about is like, how do we do that? And what does that look like for us?
Well, how would you balance it with what the story you told about the fear that the two gods came down?
I mean, I think that's the tension, right? Like that's because in his mind, it is fear. Like he is not just manipulating the people. Like he's afraid too, I think.
Yeah.
But he's also interpreting it through his lens of like something of divine nature occurred.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not discounting it. He's not saying, oh, that's the false god. And that's, you're doing witchcraft and magic and everything else. He's like, no, this is legit stuff.
These are my gods.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going right now. I'm not going to get lunch. I'm going right now.
Yeah. But if he doesn't do that, then Paul doesn't have a chance to witness to him. Right?
That's right.
I mean, it makes that an opportunity. God using that as an opportunity. Yeah.
Last one, mission includes returning, not just moving forward. Paul returns to the places that hurt him. That really stuck out to me as I read this week, because there are times when you feel pain, but you move on and you don't engage that again. He has to go back to these communities, and you'll hear that in the last part. Encouragement is essential to perseverance. What do we do to encourage one another on a constant basis to build up that level, to be able to persevere what we're doing, because that happens in the text. And success is measured by faithfulness, not whether you got stoned or not. How did today go? Well, I got stoned. I don't know if it was a good day. Nope, that's not our measurement. Faithfulness is our measurement. Paul and Barnabas proclaimed the good news to the people in Derbe and made many disciples. Then they returned to Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch, where they strengthened the disciples and urged them to remain firm in the faith. They told them, if we are to enter God's kingdom, we must pass through many troubles. They appointed elders for each church. With prayer and fasting, they committed these elders to the Lord, in whom they had placed their trust. After Paul and Barnabas traveled through Pisidia, they came to Pamphylia. They proclaimed the word in Perga and went down to Attalia. From there, they sailed to Antioch, where they had been entrusted by God's grace to the work they had now completed. On their arrival, they gathered the church together and reported everything that God had accomplished through their activity and how God had opened a door of faith for the Gentiles. They stayed with the disciples a long time. You know, we got stoned and we just kept going. What do you notice about that, Carl?
Well, I was trying to figure out why they needed to go back, and it makes sense. They just have to have a follow-up visit. They have to have a follow-up visit, take inventory, strengthen where they need to, encourage where they need to. So yeah, I don't know. What jumps out at me is that they were being faithful to their mission, and part of that is going back to potential danger, but to follow up and make sure that this very delicate brand new church could live and thrive.
You work in project management remotely. There are times when you text because you don't want to disturb the person. There are times when you email because you want the documentation. And there are times when we've all said to each other, you're going to have to pick up the phone. We need to speak to this individual. We're going to have to visit. How often is it elevated to the point that you need to speak directly with the individual?
I try to avoid that whenever possible. I prefer to hit him up on a Teams chat.
Yeah.
The structure on how we work, we do have scheduled, structured stand-ups. They're supposed to be only about 15 minutes. Sometimes they go longer than that, but we have forced face-to-face communication in our model.
Yeah. Because it just takes that sometimes. And even though this is not a confrontational thing, it's a support thing, circling back and reinforcing those people, not just continuing to expand. If you opened new restaurants as a franchise and never visited the previous ones, you only look to the new ones you had built, of course, it's going to be crumbling behind you. So with the entire list in front of us, we'll reverse it. Brad, which one would you pick?
That last point, that success is measured by faithfulness. I will never forget. That was like one of the first lessons I think I learned from a pastor, a mentor, who basically said, you are not called to be successful. You're called to be faithful. Like, you're called to to go to the vineyard. And that means that sometimes you're going to toil in some soil. You're going to plant some seeds. You're going to do some watering. You're going to pull some weeds. And every now and then you get to produce, you get to see the fruit produced, and those are few and far between. So I think you're looking at here, Paul speaking specifically from his source of discomfort, saying to those disciples, it is through many persecutions that we must enter the kingdom of God. And he lived it. I mean, he had the scars and the bruises to prove that he didn't just talk the talk, but he actually lived it out. So, yeah, the faithfulness throughout this chapter is pretty important.
It echoes what we read last week, Carl, because another Herod in a line of Herods realized that the crowd liked it when he killed Christian faith community leaders. So Paul was always at risk. So by the end of our recording, we're saying just making it one more day sometimes is the biggest deal there is. And that ended up being the final third of my sermon, because guess who didn't make it one more day? At the end of that story, Herod goes to a fancy dinner. He's got on a fancy shirt. He's declaring a fancy message, and the crowd is exalting him, and he drops dead, and worms eat him. Guess who wasn't there the next day? Herod. So to Brad's point, showing up that next day could be the day that it breaks through. It could be the day that impediment's done, that person's done, whatever it may be. Which one would be the one you would pick, Carl?
I think Brad talked me into trying to add a bullet point here, unless you've already got it and it's worded a little differently. Brad pointing out that Paul decided to pivot. He decided to call an audible and tried to talk about what the listeners or the people of the city could understand, and that is that our God is bringing the rain and the seasonal opportunities and the food, that he was for lack of a better term, he was working to preach to the choir. It wasn't a Christian choir yet, but he was trying to get their attention, understanding that the God we're serving is providing all these things that you attribute to the other gods. So I don't know how we word that, but that's what I would add as a bullet.
I like that. And you're going to stick a pin in that, Carl, because we're going to come back to that if we make it to Acts 17.
Oh, we'll make it.
Dropping the T's.
Yeah, that's my favorite chapter in the entire Bible. Is Acts 17.
Really?
Yeah, it's awesome.
All right. That's going to be fun when we get there.
Yeah. I better be on the show for that one.
All right. I will double check that. Normally we're going a chapter a week. And it's really, really important to point out here. Advent United Methodist is an incredible host to Simpsonville United Methodist in this interim period. And they gave us a great youth space where just a perfect worship space for us that's turnkey. And we've really enjoyed it. Every once in a while, they need that space. So they need it this Sunday. So Simpsonville United Methodist does not have a service this Sunday. We are going to the Advent service at 10:30, and Russell's graciously invited me to come up and participate, Brad, which is always a treat to participate with him. So I made people repeat it back to me because it came up kind of suddenly, the need. So just making sure no Simpsonville service this Sunday. If we did have a service this Sunday and I had the sermon, I think I would pick the fear element and kind of play off limited security status and influence. And look, you can go into a new village. People don't know exactly who you are. Turn it up and go. He's returning back to those places, back to that upheaval, back to those destabilized structures. And he just continues to do it. And shows up every day. So credit to Paul. Sometimes he's incredibly frustrating to me. But when you read Acts, you see a basis for what he did and why he was the backbone of the start of the church. Well, thank you both for joining. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We're trying a new model of recording on Google. Hopefully it's fantastic. And look at the Complete Bible Notes hyperlink. It's at the bottom of the show. And sermons come out Sunday afternoon, podcast Tuesday or Wednesday night. Spotify or YouTube, you'll find them both. And appreciate you tuning in. Have a great week. Join us again next time.